All right, good morning, everyone. We are on a right on time, on Idaho time. Apologies for the late, just had to do something for our Pew Packers lesson today, and too many plates spinning. Yeah. As I've told you in the past, I have my dad's. I don't vocalize very well, so is that better? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? All right. So just a little refresher. We're looking at the subject of angels and the different places that we find them. And last week we talked about that the term angels, which one of the reasons we're doing this is because it is a kind of a loaded term. You say the word to people and there's all kinds of images that come up in their mind. And not bad or wrong, just any number of different images. But the word angel comes from angelos, which means messenger. And it technically means that the word itself in the Greek technically means one who is sent. So one who is sent, obviously messenger, the same idea. It's a transliterated word, which means you take the Greek word and then you literally bring it over to the corresponding letters in English, and we get angel. And we have the same situation with the terms Christ or baptism or apostle. They just get brought over. And I don't know if I said this last Sunday, but there's obviously not a thing wrong with this. The only issue is that we get the Greek to English word in terms of a transliteration, but we don't get the meaning. We don't know what these words actually mean because we just bring the word over. So that just is something that might be good for us to know. So we were, I think, here last week, Genesis 32, verse 22. Jacob wrestles here with a man. Hosea chapter 12 and verse 4 possibly implies that it's Jesus. And in 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 4, which is what we're going to look at in our lesson today, it mentions that the water that the Israelites got while they're in the wilderness, it identifies that rock as Jesus or as Christ. So we mentioned last week that it could be argued from a number of places, Sinai being one of those places, that there are places in the Old Testament where we could find the Christ, the second person of the Godhead, Jesus, whatever you want to call that or identify that as. And this may be one of those places where the pre-incarnate Jesus wrestles with Jacob, and then you get the blessing and all the things that come out of that. Now, I'll tell you very quickly, I'm not saying that I would sit here and argue either way about that. This is more stuff that's just interesting to think about. In Exodus chapter 3 and verse 2, we find there that there's an angel of the Lord that appears to Moses in the flames of fire from within the bush. And to me, what's interesting about this is that I think there's a lot of content and phrases that sometimes we overlook. And one of those is with Exodus 3 that this fire is coming from within the bush. The bush isn't burning because the fire there is an angel of the Lord. So it's not necessarily the bush that is burning, but the fire exists within the bush because it specifically states in a flame of fire from within the bush. And this may not be the greatest connecting of dots, but you know, in Acts 2, whenever there were flames of fire on their head as the Spirit spoke through them, you know, their head was not on fire, but there was a flame of fire above their heads as they spoke in different languages and as the Spirit gave them the content that they shared. So we have somewhat the same idea here, that as Moses is listening and that whole conversation takes place, that a messenger of God is giving the content, having that conversation, and doing that whole situation with Moses. And one of the things I hope that we, yeah.
I'm sorry, it was really kind of interesting what you just said. I have not really ever connected those two events.
Yeah.
The Lord appeared to Moses in the bush, and then the flame comes of fire.
Yeah.
Both kind of augured in a new era.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Very
that's
true.
kind of interesting.
Very true. Very true.
The old versus the new.
Right.
Still, it's
Right.
the beginning
Yeah.
in both cases.
Yeah. And not only that, to continue that, is you have Moses listening to the Father, leading the people. You have Peter inaugurating the church, being led by the Father, the Spirit, etc. In terms of the church, the church in the wilderness, the church spiritually, and all those kind of cool, really cool things. One of the things I hope that you notice here, and this has kind of been this journey as I've looked at angels and tried to kind of reconfigure the way that I think about these, get in a different lane, so to speak, is I have noticed a lot of things in Scripture that I know, that I've learned, that I've read for, so I don't know, since junior high, probably earlier. I had these ideas set in my mind about what happened and what took place. And then as we take these different places in Scripture, and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, that was an angel? The whole time I thought that was, Jehovah. That was God. That was God that had that conversation with Moses. And Exodus 3, as well as what Stephen's going to say in Acts 7, that's an angel, a messenger of God that did that. And on one hand, it doesn't make any difference. It's still God's message to the people. But on the other hand, I think it gives us a different visual, mental idea of what angels do. And the place that God puts them, where we think it's God, it's a messenger of the Lord, a messenger of God does it. And I think that's very important for us today as we think about, when Jesus says, go into all the world and preach the gospel, that we are messengers for God. 2 Corinthians 15. Do what? What does it say, 15? We're ambassadors for Christ. Yes, that's exactly it. We are messengers of God, ambassadors for Christ to the world. So we are literally angels to this world. If you use the word in its true sense, we are messengers of God, we're jars of clay. All of these ideas that it just so happens to be in the Old Testament, normally it seems, they were spirits or maybe a voice. Today it's us, God's temple, that shares that message, shares that life, shares the content for the world. And I don't think I've mishandled any of the connecting the dots there. To me, it's really, really cool. God offers to us, we as angels, as messengers for this world in terms of all we do.
They were also his army
Yes.
in several cases.
Yes. Very true. Well, when you look at 2 Kings, Elijah and his servants, and they could see the visible army.
You're talking about the way things that
So this next one is very interesting in Numbers 22. And that whole story, as Balaam is very upset, and in fact he begins to beat the donkey that he's on, because the donkey, what does the donkey see there? Yeah, he sees this angel that's in front of him, but Balaam can't see it. And so he starts beating on this donkey. And finally, this angel of the Lord speaks to Balaam through this donkey. And so if you think about how bizarre this is, that this man of God, who's being very stubborn, and as this angel of the Lord, only the donkey can see this angel. It's not in carnate form, it's not in human form, but the angel allows this donkey to see it, and then the angel speaks through the donkey to Balaam. They have this entire conversation. So not only does the angel speak through a bush, through fire, but in Numbers 22, he speaks through a donkey to this very stubborn man. And then, of course, in Acts chapter 7, as we, I don't know when the last time you've read Acts chapter 7. It is a long chapter. It is a long chapter. And for those who think sometimes I preach long, Acts 7 is long. It is a lot of content that Stephen gives to prove Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. So he mentions later on in this lesson, this speech that he gives, that the law at Sinai was given by angels, by angelos, by messengers of God. And he specifically, I think when I went back and looked, it's plural. It's not singular. So you have Exodus 3, where an angel of the Lord appears to Moses in flames of fire. And then you have Acts 7, where the law at Sinai is given by angels. So in both of these cases, God himself, Jehovah, doesn't do the presenting, but he does it through his messengers, does it through angels.
So Andy,
Yeah.
that's the only place that really you see where God shows himself, where he talks to Moses and says, I'll show you on the backside.
It seems to be, yeah. Which is, again, another cool reason to study this stuff is when is God himself there, and when does he utilize his messengers to do different things? And those times when we're pretty sure it's God, and then we find out, oh, holy cow, it's a messenger, it's an angel that not only did that, but, you know, in Exodus 3, this angel is the one that has this whole conversation with Moses. Have you ever thought about that? It wasn't God that did that. That was an angel that did that. And then, of course, in Acts 7, when you see all the stuff that happens at Sinai, the law that is given is angels that's giving that to, at least according to Acts 7. That's what's happening. And I say that because I know oftentimes the things that we have in our mind, I'm gonna say religiously, in terms of biblical ideas, sometimes we get stuff set and our ideas, our thoughts, kind of become sacred. That was God that did that. Jehovah did that. God was present there. And we actually look into it, and it was a messenger of God, which doesn't make the message any less authoritative or powerful or any of those things. But God uses his messenger to do that. So for us today, you know, what things is God doing? And he's calling us to do it. He's calling us as angels, as messengers, to do in the name of Christ, in the name of grace, in the name of mercy, in the name of serving people helping people. Hebrews 11, I think we mentioned this last week. Hebrews 11 talks about entertaining angels unaware. And I think if you were to ask most Christians, I'm going to be very broad in that. I haven't obviously talked to most Christians. If you were to really pin someone down and ask them, what does that mean? Most people will give you their thought. This is what I think. I think at the end of the day, most people have no idea what that means. Now, they give ideas and thoughts, but it's a challenging verse sometimes to deal with. Okay, so a few more. And I think next week we might look at Anna's question from last week, looking in Revelation and seeing the cherubim and seraphim and a lot of things that happen there. Really, really cool stuff. Okay, so I'm not sure why I put Genesis 32 there twice. Genesis 18. Let's go ahead and turn to Genesis 18. Because this is one of those interesting ones that possibly should make us go, what's happening there? Because we have these men that approach Abraham. Genesis 18, 1 through 8. So the Lord, and a little aside here, and I think it's kind of hard for us possibly to wrap our minds around this, but generally when you see, there are, I don't know, maybe 3 different ways to offer that the Bible gives us to call God God. One of them is Elohim, when you look in Genesis 1, and there's some other places where that shows up, is that idea of sovereignty and God and all that. But here with Lord, it is Yahweh and Adonai put together. And so when you see Lord in all caps, or at least the L is all caps and the rest is smaller caps, it seems to be Yahweh and Adonai, which is, it's both a sovereign as well as a personal name, it seems. And I say it seems because it's Hebrew, and so we some things we can't pinpoint. So the Lord, Yahweh and Adonai, appeared again. Well, and one other idea is that when you see Elohim, at least in Genesis 1, it's in a creative sense. Here in Genesis 18, this Lord is in a God sense that happens personally, because he's going to go to Abraham and have this whole interaction. So the Lord appeared again to Abraham. Now, when he says again, what does again mean? It's happened before. And can you think of the other times that it's happened before Genesis 18? And I ask that because there's like 4 where he obviously in Genesis 12 as he meets with Abram, and then in Genesis, I want to say 15 and 17 possibly, where he re-engages the covenant with Abram. And then here in Genesis 18, the Lord appeared again to Abraham after the changing of the name and the covenant that he reconnected with, the descendants, all the things that God is going to do for him. He appeared again to Abraham near the oak grove belonging to Mamre. And one day Abraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent during the hottest part of the day. He looked up and noticed 3 men standing nearby. Yeah. What's that? Oh, 18:1. Oh, NLT, New Living Translation. Oh, it didn't say again. Okay. Oh, yeah, NIV didn't say it either. There you go. Maybe the NLT people just assumed it was again because he'd done it before. So I'll switch over to the NIV. So Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby, and when he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. And so before we get any further, at this point, if you don't know this story, are these angels? If you don't know this story, which, for those of us who have been reading this since we were 12, do what? Oh, it says men? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Is there any indication that these are angels? These are 3 men, flesh. In fact, they're going to eat with Abraham. And yet, who is appearing to Abraham? It's the Lord. It's Jehovah, Yahweh Adonai, that is meeting with him. In the flesh, he can see them. And he is not disturbed like Zechariah was, like Mary was, like Joseph was, startled. But he sees them. And when he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them, and he bowed low to the ground. Now, at whatever level of studying I've done on this, for this ancient culture, there were a lot of customs, a lot of things that they did with and for visitors that not only do we not do, but it just isn't in our Western arena to think about. We want to be hospitable and we want to help people, but for them, visitors they just reacted in a very different way. And I say that because I've always assumed when he bows low to the ground that he's obviously worshiping, and he's worshiping the Lord and all that. But looking into this culture, it doesn't necessarily mean that. They were very hospitable to visitors and etc. Yeah.
When I first read this, I went 3 places.
Yeah.
Okay, one was the cultural thing. One is he's hungry for
Right.
the other was that he might have realized that he could eat.
Yeah. True. Yeah. No, that's very true. All 3 of those are very possible and acceptable. Yeah, true.
Yeah, I was just going to echo Les's point, which is that what you have to remember too, the environment that they're living in.
Yeah.
Right? You're wanderers.
Yes.
Sojourners,
Yes.
travelers.
Yes.
It's hard to make a living just when you're in one place.
Yeah.
To be well fed and to get water and all that while you're traveling.
Yeah.
You went out of your way to help people when they came to you because of
Yeah.
the harshness of the environment. So,
Yeah. And also, as we oftentimes will jump to conclusions without even realizing we're doing it, bowing low to the ground doesn't necessarily mean worship. It doesn't necessarily mean honor in a holy type of way. And when you actually sit down and look at the Hebrew of this, it's not necessarily worship. It is how they responded. And to both of your points, yes, it's respect. Yeah, which we don't necessarily do a lot of, but they did there. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Interstellar. It's long, and for a lot of people, it's very boring. It's one of my favorite movies because of the content of it or whatever. But they go to this, the Earth's going downhill, and they're trying to find another planet to inhabit, and that's a really simplified version of the movie. But they find this guy. What's that?
Yeah, that's extremely.
That's what I meant. That's a way oversimplified. Do you like the movie too?
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Every time I turn it on, Terry's like, oh goodness, here we go again. But I love it. It's such an awesome movie. To me, it's very well written. Except for when he goes off into that freaky world and he ends up being the ghost and all that stuff. Anyway, but when he meets this guy on this planet that is trying to find a way that will be the planet to inhabit, he wakes up and sees people, and that happens. where he hadn't had people around him for a long, long time. And he sees people and connection and all that kind of stuff. And the same situation may be here with Abraham, where he's like, holy cow, there's people, and he greets them and he's very respectful toward them, et cetera, et cetera.
And I do think the bowing down is really more of I am serving.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. Yes, yes. Right, right, yeah. But these may be people that aren't there to serve him, but, in terms of conversation and connection and all that. And I want to make the point again, because I think it's very important for us that there are times in our study that we kind of come to certain places where we think we know the story and we're very familiar with it, and we can insert things into it that are just simply not there. I've just always assumed he bowed down, he worshiped because it's the Lord, and et cetera. And that's probably just not the case here when you consider the culture at the time.
And when he addresses them too, he uses Adonai, just Adonai.
Yes, 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 yes.
Making a connection, at least
It doesn't seem. Right, right. Yes. And to that point, and I was going to say not to overdo this, but we may already be past that. To that point, as we read through these things, we are reading what the author of Genesis is giving us. That's all we have to go on. Obviously, throughout the whole Bible, all we have to go on is what we're given. And so we don't need to, write in the margin, so to speak, extra things that just simply aren't there. So if I found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet, rest under the tree. Let me give you something to eat so that you can be refreshed, and then go on your way now that you have come to your servant. What do they do after that? And again, this may be oversimplifying everything, but what do they do after that? And I'm not asking you for content. What specifically do they do? They have a conversation with him. They speak to him. They hear what he says, and they say, very well, do as you say. So Abraham, it doesn't seem, has any idea these are three men that have come to him, strangers. He is going to serve them, take care of them, refresh them, and then they're going to be on their way. But as this is all happening, who are these three men? They are Jehovah. This is the Lord appearing to Abraham, but he's got no idea up to this point. So these are angels that are visiting Abraham after all of the other incidents that has happened between God in terms of this voice that is there. And Abraham responds to these men, wants to take care of them in a very, very, merciful, gracious way. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. Quick, get 3 seahs of the finest flour, knead it, bake some bread. And then he ran to the herd, selected a choice tender calf, gave it to the servant who hurried to prepare it. And he then brought some curds of milk, some curds and milk, and the calf that had been prepared, set it before them. While they ate, he stood near under a tree. How much effort does Abraham go for these men? Yeah.
It takes a while to eat bread and bake it, and also talk about slaughtering an animal.
Yeah. Yeah. So they weren't there for 30 minutes, right? It's not like, well, I'm going to, here's some cookies that I made yesterday, and here's a cup of coffee, and, take care. This took some time. At least. Yeah. At least. And so as this is happening, Abraham is in the presence of Jehovah in the form of these three men that come by. And then what do they ask him in verse 9? Where's Sarah? And obviously all we have is what we have in front of us, but there's no, wait, what? How do you know I have a wife? Not only did they know he had a wife, but they knew her name. Where's your wife Sarah? And it doesn't seem like he skips a beat there in the tent. Then one of them said, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Have you ever thought about this conversation? And I don't mean, again, as I've read this in the past, I hit verse 9, and then I just go for the son and how crazy that is. So not only do they know he has a wife, and they know her name, is Abraham's mind here being blown? These three strangers, he doesn't know that it's the Lord. It doesn't appear that he does. And you're going to have a son next year. And this is after everything that has happened. The promise, the covenant. He's going to a different country. You're going to have many, many descendants, the stars in the sky, the sand on the seashore. Now you're going to have a son.
And this really does go to the faith area.
Yeah.
Because he's not seeing God.
Right.
basically.
Right.
He's seeing three men.
Yeah.
Coming and confirming the message that was given to him.
Yes.
And he's connecting the dots, or at least we perceive.
It seems that he is.
Dots. Certainly see that way. And now all him is Abraham.
Yes.
So
Yes. Yes.
it speaks to how
Yes.
we develop that faith is through situations like this.
Yes. Yes. So they have to be, right? Yeah. Yes. Yes. And thank you, Bob, because that's a great point to make as we talk about the names of different things. When we looked at the idea of a prophet, it's one who speaks in the place of another. A prophet isn't specifically in terms of the name one who speaks in the place of God. That's not what the name means. It's one who speaks for another. If a king or general or whatever sends somebody with a message, they are a prophet. When you look at Exodus, God tells Moses that Aaron would be his prophet because he would give the message from God to Moses to Aaron that would go to Pharaoh and do all the talking. Do you realize that when you look at all of the conversations that happened between God and Pharaoh were done by Aaron, not Moses? Because what did Moses tell God in that whole conversation in Exodus 3? This ain't my thing. I don't want to. I have no desire to do this. Please find someone. Hey, Aaron, my brother, he's cool with this. So every time you see that, it's Aaron. Aaron is Moses' prophet with the message.
You often see the phrase prophet as describing someone in the Bible.
Yes.
So, who's a prophet?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Good point. Good point. So making that point, these men as angels are God's prophets to Abraham to share this message. And that may not be the mountain of a cool thing in everybody else's head as it is mine, but when you start bringing all these terms together and you fit them into places like this, they take on, at least to me, a different meaning. That Jehovah visits these men, or visits Abraham in the form of angels as prophets to Abraham to give him a message. And this message happens to be not a present one or a past one, but about the future. You will have a son a year from now. And so, again, I think in verse 12 we get caught up in Sarah laughing and that whole scene. But how cool this is that these men, these angels, become prophets about something that's going to happen in the future. And we may get into verse 16 later and all the stuff that happens there and how God works through that whole situation. But we may not, because I'm really excited to get into Revelation and Anna's question and look at some really cool stuff that's there. So, all right. Well, we'll, I don't know what we're going to do next week because I'm really jumpy to get into Revelation. So we may do that, and then we'll kick back into this and look at some of these other situations. So, Any closing thoughts? Yeah.
Thinking about Sarah laughing at God's power and how many times a week does that happen
Yeah.
in our own life.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes we are the ones that minimize God's power in this world.
Yeah.
We just don't see it.
Yeah. Well, and that's very, very true. I thought you were going to go somewhere else that I think is also cool, is that Sarah, in laughing at these men and their message, was laughing at angels and ultimately laughing at God's prophets, laughing at Jehovah. And to your point, his power. This is going to happen a year from now. We'll be back. Right. Sure. So you're not laughing at general men. You're laughing at God's angels. And you're telling them, can't happen, not going to happen, not possible. So, all right, well, let's close with a prayer. Loving God, Father, help us to recognize in our lives your actions, your movement. And Father, help us to sometimes get in a different lane as we consider what you're doing and what you're teaching us, what you're wanting to communicate to us. And help our faith to be adjusted to that so that we can be your angels, your prophets in this world through the word that you've given us, through the might that you give us, so that we can share Jesus with people. Father, we pray this in the great name that